When does a phenomenon become the unknown? When all attempts at understanding fail, and those who thirst for knowledge and understanding watch as research turns to ash in their mouth, as the phenomenon turns from a riddle to be solved into anomalous fascination. Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in to episode 13 of the Anomalous Fascination podcast. As always, if you love the podcast and want to show your support, tell a friend about it. It means the world. As discussed previously, I'll be hosting one show per month involving the paranormal, which largely just means that the event or phenomenon is not supported by science, but the mystery of the unexplainable that you've come to know and love is of course still present. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and always appreciate your feedback. Being that this is episode 13 and coming out on the 13th, I decided this would be the perfect time to dive into the paranormal. And most importantly, curses. We've mentioned curses in passing a few episodes, but never really sunk our teeth into that side of things, being that curses by their very nature are considered paranormal or superstition. So this week, I decided to take a closer look at curses, and in particular, an item of such note and importance that it often comes up as the number one most cursed item throughout history. The Hope Diamond. An item of such incredible value and worth that anyone who owned it was hard to miss. Perhaps that's a large part of why this item is so very well known amongst the cursed items of history. Because if you were to own this item, you either had to be immeasurably wealthy or a very good thief. This item caused a string of misfortune across the many countries and people it visited. And of course, there are some sources you can view that will explain why the events are, quote, completely explainable. However, it always tends to be a stretch of an explanation, followed by another stretch of an explanation, and so on and so forth. So the question is this: if curses were not viewed as superstition, paranormal, or folklore, would people still seek to explain away these events? Because from where I'm standing, there is one rule in science and philosophy that seems to fit this item's history to a T. This item seems to have brought misfortune to everyone who possessed it, with no other commonalities between these people except for this item. So, Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the right one. Thus, the Hope Diamond is cursed. Let's take a stroll, shall we? As with all lore, some folks will embellish parts of the story, despite the story itself being fascinating enough on its own. I'll do my best to point out these embellishments that have been suggested. The origin of the gem that would become known as the Hope Diamond is disputed between two stories, though most research points to the more mundane origin. It is said that in 1666, a famous gem merchant named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier traveled to modern-day India. While there, Tavernier discovered the incredible iconography that they possessed, and one statue in particular caught his eye. A large statue of the Hindu goddess Sita, in which eyes of the statue were brilliant indigo diamonds. It is said, then, that Tavernier stole one of these diamonds from the statue and fled with it. Then, after returning to France and selling the diamond, he set out to Russia, where on his way he was brutally killed by a pack of wolves. So, that's one story. The other one, which I mentioned, is more mundane, but pointed to as more accurate. He purchased the diamond from the Kalur mine in India, and after selling the diamond, lived to the ripe old age of 84. Doesn't have quite the same ring to it, does it? Either way, the original diamond had a weight of between 112 carats and 115 carats, which either way puts it at a whopping half-pound, an unfathomable weight for a diamond. So needless to say, it was no surprise that when Tavernier returned to France, that the King of France, Louis XIV, had to have it. And have it he did. The diamond, of course, was still rough when it was purchased, and was then recut by another jeweler, bringing the weight down to just over 67 carats. This is, of course, when the diamond was set in gold on a neck ribbon for the king, and would become known for many years as the Blue Diamond of the Crown, or simply the French Blue. So, the curse. Things started to turn sour for folks almost immediately. Louis XIV would have 19 children in all during his lifetime, including only 6 legitimate children with the Queen. Of those children, only one would survive past the age of 5. Louis XIV, however, would not die an early death, but rather live quite long for the time. However, he would watch as so many more family members would die, including his son, their son, his wife, his brother, and almost everyone else who could have possibly been in line for the crown. Louis XIV would eventually die of gangrene, and the crown would pass to Louis XV, his 5-year-old great-grandson and only remaining heir. But not before the Blue Diamond of the Crown would ruin another life. A high-ranking employee of the king, Nicolas Fouquet, was granted permission to wear the diamond for a special occasion. Despite him being one of the king's most trusted and loved employees, he quickly fell out of favor with the king within weeks of wearing the diamond. This resulted in the king first banishing him from France, but before he could go, the king changed his mind and instead sentenced Fouquet to a lifetime of prison. I certainly hope the special occasion was worth it. Louis XV would also live quite a long life, just like his great-grandfather. However, as with Louis XIV, it was not without its shares of misfortune. Louis XV would bring great loss to France, including the loss of the 7 Years' War, where they were forced to cede New France in North America to the British and Spanish. A stretch of land composed of most of eastern Canada, Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin. In addition, he was an extremely corrupt man, and due to their military losses, the treasury continued to lose money with very few gains. Needless to say, when he died in 1774, and his grandson Louis XVI took over, he had left France as a powder keg. Now, most of us already know what happens next, but for those who do not, let me summarize. Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette, were handling a volatile country and, well, let's just say, let them eat cake wasn't viewed as a terrific response to people being unable to afford bread. The French Revolution took place during his reign, and eventually the guillotine came down on both he and his wife, Marie Antoinette. Before and after his death, his remaining children would all perish as well. Oh, and another member of Marie Antoinette's court, Marie Louise, was brutally murdered by a mob. I will not go into specifics, but trust me, it's rough. And eventually they would take, well, a part of her, put it on a spike, and place it outside Marie Antoinette's prison window. Yikes. At this point, the diamond would be stolen from the palace in 1792 and would disappear for 20 years before resurfacing in London. The diamond had been recut, but was clearly the same diamond, when it was sold to King Henry IV of the United Kingdom. After this cut, it had lost much of its size, reducing it to 45.5 carats from the original 67, and was changed from the large triangle shape of the French blue to a more rounded shape. The jeweler, William Falls, responsible for recutting the gem, would end up having a touch of bad luck after the sale, as his son would murder him shortly after the sale and then commit suicide. King Henry, after obtaining the diamond, would spend much of his life falling further and further into debt, which resulted in the stone being sold to pay off much of his enormous debt after his death in 1830, which would then send the diamond into the hands of its namesake, Thomas Hope and the Hope family, with whom it would stay for quite some time. The Hope family, despite giving the diamond its name, would still have some ill fortune as well, though admittedly less than its prior owners. Perhaps largely because they did not particularly wear the stone, but rather had it as part of a larger collection of diamonds. It was passed down through a couple generations of Hopes with considerable conflict in the family, before finally falling into the hands of Lord Francis Hope and his wife May, who did in fact wear the gem. They would quickly fall into financial ruin and file bankruptcy, before finally being given permission to sell the Hope diamond in 1901 to pay off debts. At which point, his wife May ran off with another man, and they were divorced in the following months. The diamond would then go temporarily to a Greek merchant by the name of Sion Mounsherid, who would resell the diamond in 1910 to Pierre Cartier. Shortly after, our friend Simon drove his car off a cliff with his wife and children inside. In 1911, the diamond was shown to Evelyn Walsh McLean of Washington, D.C., but she didn't like the setting, which resulted in the diamond having its final alteration to the version we see today, as it was mounted in a headpiece with 3 layers of large white diamonds surrounding it. Mrs. McLean, unfortunately, would be hit arguably the hardest. She became obsessed with the diamond, wearing it everywhere, even letting her dog wear it on his collar. But in the years immediately following the purchase, her mother-in-law died, her son died at the age of 9, her husband left her for another woman before he died in a mental hospital, her daughter died of a drug overdose at 25, and not long after, she was forced to sell her newspaper, the Washington Post, before finally dying with, you guessed it, massive debt. It had been known for quite some time that the diamond was cursed, but no one ever quite believed it, though they certainly had hesitation. Her entire jewelry collection was left to her grandchildren, and although they were not supposed to be able to sell any items until they reached 25 years old, one of the trustees intervened and allowed the sale of the Hope diamond, which was sold to a New York diamond merchant, partly to pay off their grandmother's debts, but largely just to get the diamond out of the family. The new jeweler had toured the US with a show presenting the diamond amongst many other incredible pieces, hoping to find the perfect buyer for the item. But finally, in 1958, the jeweler was persuaded by the Smithsonian Institute to donate the Hope diamond to the National Museum of Natural History. So, the jeweler sent it on its final trip to its final owner via mail. Wrapped in plain brown paper, insured for $1 million, with postage of $2.44, where it was hand-delivered to the Smithsonian, after which the curse was ended. Well, kind of. Let's take a quick break and come back to discuss the rest of the story. Thank you all for sticking it through that timeline, but to fully explain a curse and the justifications for its fame and superstition, only a couple instances of bad luck simply won't cut it. In fact, there are a few folks here and there that I didn't cover, simply to spare time. Don't worry, nothing too significant, as the people I skipped only had it for a short time and, well, things went south for them rather quickly. So, is the Hope Diamond cursed? It's easy to point at this timeline and say, these can all be explained. And honestly, you wouldn't be wrong. Certainly, when you consider various factors like the wealth of the people, and the state of mind they would have to be in to buy such an exorbitantly expensive item, some events could be pointed to as a result of a depressed or high-profile person. One could also point at many of the events and say, these are just misfortunes of life. Everyone's going to have some darkness and sadness. And again, in some cases you would be right, absolutely. The fact is, one could go through this entire list and explain away each and every one of them individually. But by doing this, are we not missing the forest for the trees? Focusing so much on disproving each individual aspect that we can't see its history as a whole? There is certainly no lack of sample size here to call these events one-offs. And to go back to episode 3 regarding reincarnation, quote, does the refusal to even look at these findings, let alone debate them, come down to our fear of being wrong? Don't worry, I'm not here to debate the authenticity of curses. I just think looking at these events with some level of open-mindedness is only fair. So are curses merely the remnants of history? A scapegoat for tough luck, coincidence, and failure? Memories of a time when magic existed in the world in lieu of science we didn't understand yet? I guess we'll never know. But I know this. If someone texted me tomorrow and told me I could own the Hope Diamond, under the agreement that I never could sell it, I'm leaving them on red. Oh, and one last thing. You know how I said the curse had ended in 1958 after it was delivered to the Smithsonian? Well, that's not entirely true, because it did claim one last victim. A mailman by the name of James Dodd had just finished a delivery of an item crudely wrapped in brown paper, when he set off to make another delivery in his truck. Only minutes later, his vehicle was T-boned and his leg was crushed, leaving the man hobbled. Weeks later, the man was still on crutches, but walking down the street, when he was hit by a truck and suffered a severe head injury. Not long after, the man found out that both his wife and his dog would die rather suddenly. And just to top it off, his house would burn to the ground. And that was just the mailman. So, let's just say the current owner of the Hope Diamond for the past 62 years has to be hoping that they will not come across the same bad fortune. And who is that owner? The United States of America. Thank you again for listening to this episode of Anomalous Fascination. If you'd like to keep in touch with the show, you can find me at AnomalyPod on Twitter, or email me at anomalousfascination@gmail.com. And if you love the show, hop on Apple Podcasts and leave it a nice 5-star rating and review. Or even just tell a friend about it. And until next time, thanks for listening.